They said money could buy anything, even life itself, but the moment Alexander Stone collapsed on the marble floors of his mansion, the illusion shattered. His guests gasped, his wife screamed, and his empire stood still. The billionaire who controlled industries with a snap of his fingers now lay helpless, his chest rising and falling in shallow desperation. Within hours, private jets carried in the finest doctors from around the world. Specialists in white coats filled his home, examining every inch of his body with machines that blinked and hummed. 20 of the brightest medical minds surrounded him, yet none could provide an answer. They whispered among themselves, baffled, puzzled, afraid to admit that the richest man in the city was slipping away under their watch. Alexander had always been larger than life. His towers touched the skies, his name adorned newspapers, his face graced magazines. But behind the shine of his empire lay a man who trusted no one, not even his own family. His wife smiled beside him at events, yet her heart carried resentment for years of neglect. His son, Daniel, lived in his shadow, yearning for affection that never came. In his mansion, where glass walls reflected wealth and power, there was only one soul who truly saw him as more than money: Grace, the housekeeper. She was quiet, dutiful, invisible in her employer's eyes, yet her heart carried more compassion than all the specialists flown in at great expense. As the days passed, the doctors' faces grew pale with failure. They injected, scanned, prescribed, and debated, yet Alexander grew weaker. His skin turned gray, his eyes sank deeper, and his once commanding voice shrank into whispers. The world outside speculated wildly. Some said it was a curse, others called it karma, while his rivals secretly toasted to his downfall. But inside that mansion, despair sat heavier than the chandeliers above. His wife paced in anger, demanding answers. His son sat by his bed, eyes wide with fear. And the doctors argued endlessly, their pride unwilling to admit defeat. Grace, however, watched quietly. She noticed things they didn't, not through expensive machines but through human eyes. She saw how Alexander's hands trembled at certain hours, how he gasped for breath after meals, how his body rejected medicines that were supposed to help him. She had once seen this before, in her late husband, whose mysterious illness the doctors had misdiagnosed until it was too late. Memories clawed at her heart as she watched Alexander sink into the same shadows. She wanted to speak, but fear held her tongue. Who was she, a housekeeper, to challenge the best doctors in the world? Still, the signs nodded her. Each day, as she brought trays of food or quietly cleaned the study, she pieced together a puzzle the experts ignored. The billionaire's condition worsened not randomly, but with patterns. His chest pain came after certain supplements, his breathing faltered after swallowing pills he kept hidden in drawers. And one night, as Grace dusted his study, her hand brushed against a locked drawer. Inside lay dozens of small bottles, imported capsules promising energy, youth, and vitality. They were not prescriptions from the team of doctors. These were things Alexander had ordered in secret, trusting the promises of labels instead of the warnings of reason. Grace's heart sank. The same reckless desperation had taken her husband, and now it was dragging Alexander toward the grave. The pills, the so-called miracles, were slowly poisoning him. She stood frozen, bottles in her hand, torn between speaking up and staying silent. If she revealed what she found, she risked humiliation. She imagined the sneers of the doctors, the sharp words of his wife. Stay in your place. Yet if she stayed quiet, a man would die. A man she had once considered cold and unreachable, yes, but still a human being, still a father to a frightened boy who sat night after night at his bedside. Her heart battled her fear. She replayed memories of her husband gasping for breath, doctors brushing off her warnings until it was too late. She remembered how powerless she felt, how invisible her voice seemed in the halls of authority. And now fate placed her here again, holding knowledge that could save or doom a life. As she watched Alexander's chest rise in painful gasps, she whispered to herself that she could not let history repeat itself. The next morning, when the doctors gathered around the bed, speaking in circles, Grace stood near the doorway. Her voice trembled but carried weight. She spoke of the pills, of the patterns, of the signs she had seen. But her words were met with laughter. One doctor scoffed, "You're a housekeeper, not a physician. Leave this to professionals." Another waved her off like an insect buzzing too close. His wife glared at her, embarrassed. Even Alexander, weak and fading, barely opened his eyes to acknowledge her presence. Grace stepped back, her hands clutched tight, her heart pounding with shame. She wanted to vanish, to return to the safety of silence. Yet as she left the room, Daniel, the billionaire's son, caught her hand. His eyes brimmed with tears.
Please don't stop.
"You might be right." His words ignited something in her, a flicker of courage. She returned to her quarters that night with the bottles she had taken from the study. She studied the labels, researching quietly with her old worn books and notes from her husband's case. Every sign pointed to the same truth. Alexander was not dying from an incurable disease. He was dying from what he had willingly put into his body. As the clock struck midnight, Grace sat alone by the window, bottles lined before her. The city lights glimmered in the distance, a world that worshipped men like Alexander. Yet here he was, powerless, surrounded by brilliance but saved by none. Her mind wrestled with doubt. Perhaps she was wrong. Perhaps she was clinging to ghosts of her past. But the steady decline of his health screamed otherwise. Her intuition, sharpened by loss and grief, refused to be silenced. The following day, Alexander's condition plummeted further. Machines beeped erratically, doctors shouted orders, his wife wept loudly, and Daniel stood frozen in terror. Grace hovered near the doorway once more, the bottles hidden in her apron. Her heart raced, knowing time was slipping. She clenched them tighter, whispering to herself that no matter the ridicule, she could not watch another life slip away when the truth was within reach. And so she prepared to do what no one expected. The invisible housekeeper would speak once more, not with hesitation, but with a voice strong enough to break through pride, fear, and arrogance. For within those small bottles lay the answer 20 doctors could not see, and within Grace's courage lay the thin line between life and death for the billionaire who believed he was untouchable. Grace's hands trembled as she held the bottles before the circle of men in white coats. Her voice no longer shook as it did before. This time she spoke with the weight of memory, with the grief of a widow who had once watched someone she loved die under the same ignorance. She laid the evidence down in front of them, explaining how each of Alexander's symptoms matched not a rare disease, but the slow poisoning of his body by the very pills he trusted. The room fell into a stunned silence. Daniel clutched his father's hand tighter, begging them to at least test the pills. The doctors exchanged uneasy glances, pride and disbelief warring with the possibility that the housekeeper could be right where they had all failed. Reluctantly, they sent the bottles for analysis. Hours later, the truth returned like a thunderclap. The capsules contained dangerous substances, banned in many countries, mixed with chemicals that caused long-term organ damage. What Grace had suspected all along was confirmed. Alexander was not cursed, not beyond saving. He was poisoned by his own reckless choices, and 20 brilliant minds had missed what one watchful heart had seen. The doctors, red-faced and ashamed, ordered immediate detox treatments, flushing his system of the toxins that had been eating him alive. The days that followed felt like the lifting of a storm. Alexander's breathing steadied, his color returned, his strength flickered back like a flame shielded from the wind. The same men who had once dismissed Grace now murmured about her with awe, whispering that she had noticed what they never thought to consider. But for Grace, it was not pride. It was relief. She had saved him from the fate that had claimed her husband. She had saved a boy from losing his father. When Alexander finally opened his eyes with clarity, the first face he saw was not his wife's or the doctor's but Grace's, standing quietly near the corner of the room. For the first time, his eyes softened, no longer filled with command but with humility. In a hoarse voice, he asked her why she had done it. Grace answered simply, because no one else would. Those words lingered with him, sharper than any medicine. He realized then how blind he had been, trusting power and wealth while ignoring the human presence that had stood faithfully in his home. As strength seeped back into his body, Alexander began to see the cracks in his life more clearly. His wife, who once filled the air with sobs, now grew distant, her eyes cold with jealousy every time he spoke to Grace. The truth came to him in whispers from his staff and eventually in confessions. His wife had not been faithful. For years she had sought affection elsewhere, resentful of the man who never gave her love. The bitterness between them now boiled to the surface. Meanwhile, Grace, who had never sought his attention, had given him the greatest gift, life itself. For Alexander, the shift was not sudden but undeniable. He began to ask Grace's advice, not as a servant, but as a trusted voice. She reminded him of things no one else dared: to eat with care, to spend time with Daniel, to let go of the arrogance that nearly killed him. The boy, once ignored, now found a father who looked at him with real eyes. Grace's influence rippled through the mansion, transforming it from a palace of cold marble into a home with warmth. Yet peace did not come without conflict. His wife confronted him one evening, her voice sharp with accusation. She demanded to know why he listened more to a housekeeper than to his own family. Her words dripped with venom, calling Grace a usurper, a shadow trying to replace her. But Alexander, weakened yet unbroken, finally spoke truths he had long ignored. He told her that family was more than blood, that loyalty and love could not be bought with vows or wealth. He revealed he knew of her betrayals, her coldness, her absence when he needed her most. She stormed away, consumed by rage, while Grace, silent as always, stayed by his side not out of duty, but out of care. Alexander's empire felt his transformation as well. Once ruthless in business, he now redirected his resources toward building foundations, funding health research, and supporting the unseen workers who kept the world turning. At every press conference, when asked about his miraculous recovery, he did not praise the doctors or the machines. He spoke instead of a woman named Grace, who saw what no one else could because she looked with her heart. The world, stunned, began to see in him a man reborn, not by money, but by humility. But for Alexander, it was not about image. It was about redemption. He spent more time with Daniel, learning how to laugh with him, how to listen, how to be the father he had never been. He began to feel the weight of years wasted in cold ambition and vowed to live differently. And always near, like a quiet guardian, Grace reminded him of the fragility of life, the need for gratitude, the beauty of care. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Alexander sat with Grace in the garden. The air smelled of roses, the world peaceful after months of chaos. He turned to her and admitted that she had saved not only his life, but also his soul. He confessed that for the first time in years, he felt alive, not because of wealth, but because someone had cared enough to see him as a man rather than an empire. Grace, humble as always, simply smiled and replied, "Sometimes it takes falling to remember how to rise." The billionaire who once believed himself untouchable had learned that strength does not come from fortune, nor from 20 doctors, but from the unseen hands that dare to lift another up. His story became a legend whispered in boardrooms and homes alike, that the one who saved him was not a genius in a white coat, not a partner with a title, but the quiet housekeeper who had the courage to notice what others ignored. And so his life moved forward, no longer ruled by arrogance, but by gratitude. His wife, unable to accept the change, eventually left, consumed by her own bitterness. His son grew into a man guided by his father's newfound wisdom, shaped by Grace's steady presence. Alexander himself lived not as a king among men, but as a man who had finally understood the value of love, loyalty, and care. The lesson was simple, yet it echoed louder than any fortune. Sometimes the greatest saviors are the ones the world overlooks, and sometimes life is not saved by brilliance, but by compassion. The 20 doctors could not see what Grace did because they searched in machines, while she searched with her heart. And in the end, It was that heart that pulled a billionaire back from death's grip, teaching him and all who heard his story that wealth means nothing without someone to care.